So sci-fi and fantasy are some of the most popular fiction genres out there, but did you know that they make Christian sci-fi and fantasy books? Well, they do, and the best thing about these books is that they offer the same amazing imaginary worlds, special powers, and adventure, and an escape from reality that you might love in regular sci-fi and fantasy books. Only these books help you to get to know God a little bit better as you read them, which is why I have found that I love genres like this. So today I'm sharing my top 10 favorite Christian sci-fi and fantasy books, and of course I'm going to be ending with one of my all-time favorites. It's actually a pretty famous book series that a lot of people don't believe is a Christian series, but I personally see a lot of Christian themes in these books. Anyway, it's so good and I think everyone should read it, but we'll get to that at the end. Okay, so book number 1 is such a great one, and the thing that I love about this one so much is that if you really love a lot of the other popular fantasies out today, like The Fourth Wing or even like Powerless, you're gonna love this book. It's called The Mark of the Raven by Morgan L. Bousset. I read this one on my Kindle and I loved it so much. This is a fantasy that almost feels a little bit like a dystopian at the same time. It's about a kingdom that has a bunch of different like houses. Each different house has their own different like special power, and the house that the main character is born into, her power is dream walking, which means that she can go into other people's dreams and manipulate them and also find out like their biggest weakness and stuff. Anyway, the main character slowly finds out that the people in her house are using this power for some really bad things. It's usually just used to benefit the people in her house, and usually it hurts other people in the process. It's just very like traditional fantasy. You have kingdoms, kings, queens, there's a little bit of romance, like everything you can possibly want in a fantasy. But the best part about it, I think, is that there's a huge theme of good and evil and having to choose between the two. The main character is expected to use her powers for evil, but something in her is telling her that that's wrong. And so she has to make a big decision whether she wants to go along with what everyone else is doing and do what's wrong, or if she wants to really risk her life and do what's good. So it's a very cool story. It's very fast paced. It's also a part of a trilogy, and I'm currently working through the second book, and I just really love this one. Okay, so the next book is a little bit more on the dystopian side, but I think it's also considered sci-fi at the same time, maybe even a little bit of fantasy sprinkled in. It's called A Time to Die by Nadine Brands. This is such a unique story. Like, I've never read something like this before. Basically, it takes place in a futuristic world where everyone is born with a clock that tells you exactly when you're going to die in the future. So everyone knows when they're gonna die. And this main character starts off the book like first page knowing that she only has 1 year left to live. And so it's her just kind of trying to figure out what she should do with this year of her life. One thing leads to another, and she actually ends up getting banished from this perfect dystopian society, and she gets sent outside of the walls to just survive on her own. It's like completely opposite from the world that she's used to. It's just wilderness and wild animals. There's different like indigenous tribes that she comes across. But what's really cool about this book is that as she's trying to come to terms with her looming death, she's like learning to have a lot of peace about it, because she's discovering who God is during this year and how because of him she doesn't really have to fear death. I will say there were some parts of this book that were a little strange to me. It does get slightly graphic at some points, so just warning for that. But I have to admit, it's a very cool, very unique story that I did overall really enjoy. Book number 3 is the Wing Feather Saga. Now, this is a huge series of books, and I've only read the first one. And I will say a big majority of why I'm talking about it right now is because I know so many people love this book. It was probably one of the books that was most highly recommended to me for the longest time. And so I do think I had really high expectations going into reading this one. And there was a ton that I loved about this book. However, it's definitely a much like younger story. I'm pretty sure the books are middle grade books. So you kind of have to be prepared for that when you go into it if you're reading it as an adult. But so many people say that it's really worth it, especially if you go through the entire series. I think the stakes get a lot higher, and apparently there's a very intense emotional ending that everyone loves, no matter what age you are. So I do need to get around to finishing this series, but the first book is what I'm recommending today. It's just a very sweet, innocent story about a bunch of kids living in this magical world. I will say not a ton happened in the first book, which is why I think I had a slightly more negative reaction to it when I first read it. But because I know all these books in this series are so interconnected and that it gets so much better, I do want to recommend it because I know people love it so much. And there was still so much I could appreciate about the first book. I loved the world that they were living in and the way that it was described. I loved the relationship that all the kids had with each other, and it was just such a sweet story. So if you're a little bit younger and you're watching this video and you're looking for a fantasy that's more catered to you, I would definitely recommend the Wing Feather Saga. The next two books are by the same author. The first one is Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. If you've been watching me a lot, you've probably heard me talk about this book before, so I'll be brief. This book is a very heavy sci-fi book. It's about a man who essentially kind of gets kidnapped onto a spaceship and sent into space with a couple other people, and they land on a new planet completely different from our own. A lot of the story is about this main character discovering the planet, discovering the other living creatures on this planet. If I remember correctly, this planet is supposed to sort of resemble what the world would have looked like if there wasn't the original fall in Genesis. It is a beautiful world that is so opposite to the world that the main characters came from, and it's very adventurous as he's exploring, but the people that he came to this planet with end up wreaking a lot of havoc and bringing some negativity to this world, and it's just a very cool story. The very ending of this book, when they go back to Earth, is like one of my favorite chapters of any book ever. I don't know what it is, it's just written so well and it's just really good. I had such a good time reading this book. It's super short. You can probably read it in a day if you have a lot of time in a day. This one's also a part of a series, but I especially love this first one. Now, the next book, I don't really know how to define this one. I don't know, it just gives fantasy vibes to me, so I'm putting it on this list. It's The Screwtape Letters, also by C.S. Lewis. This book is less of a visual story and more of just a long conversation back and forth of two people writing letters to each other. Actually, not people, demons, which might sound a little crazy, but it's the coolest idea for a story that I think I've ever heard of. It's basically the perspective of a demon who's trying to hurt other people, like possess people, and he's writing back and forth to Screwtape, who's like the head demon, and he's like giving the younger one, I guess, advice about how to do it effectively. But it's so cool because it's all only in the perspective of two very evil people, and yet God is seen so clearly through it and just in the way that these demons think. And it's funny because they contradict themselves a lot and it's so obvious to you as the reader, but they don't really catch it. It's just cool that even in the perspective of someone so evil, God is still so clear. So this book was really cool to me. I highly recommend. The next two books I would say are a little bit of a mix between sci-fi and fantasy, and they're both by the same author, and I love these two a lot. The first one is called Monster by Frank Peretti. This is a very thrilling book. I would say the beginning first few chapters of this book were probably the most exciting chapters I've read in a book in a while. I love when books start like right off the bat so intense, you just go straight into the big parts of the story, and that's definitely what happened in this one. Basically, the story is about this big patch of woods out in the northwest that a lot of people like to go hunting in or camping in, but there's been some strange encounters of people claiming that there's some kind of monster in these woods. And so a lot of people don't believe it, some people do, but there hasn't been any proof of this monster existing really. So the main two characters in the beginning of this book decide to go camping in these woods, and they just have a really terrifying night encountering this monster. I think the first half of this book was so amazing and I thought it was going to be like a 5-star. And then I would say as the curtain started getting drawn back a little bit on the secrets behind what was going on, I started to maybe like the book a little bit less. I would say the answers to some things were a little bit silly, but all in all, no matter what, it was a very exciting book all the way through. I flew through this book and just overall had a very fun time reading it. The next book I've talked a little bit about before, it's called The Oath, also by Frank Peretti. This one is actually very similar to Monster, and so much about it I loved in the same way that I loved what was in Monster. This one specifically felt so much like a Stephen King book to me, so if you're a Stephen King fan, kind of similar to Monster in that it's about a small town that is having issues with some kind of presence, beast, something that's haunting and hurting people in this town. Some people are going missing because of it, and they just can't figure out what it is, and eventually somebody dies from it, and everyone thinks that it's just a bear. But one guy comes to investigate and he finds out that it's actually so much more than anyone ever anticipated. This was a super intense, suspenseful book all the way through, and I had such a fun time reading this one as well. So I highly recommend Frank Peretti as an author in general, but these two books especially I really, really loved. Number 8 and 9 on this list, I'm going to talk about pretty briefly, not because these books aren't good, these are amazing books, but I do think I talk about these books a lot, so I do fear that people are sometimes a little bit tired of me talking about these. But they're two amazing fantasy books that are both by C.S. Lewis. Number one is Till We Have Faces. This is a Greek mythology mixed with fantasy, which might sound strange. It might sound like that kind of a story wouldn't really be a Christian book, but I would say that this is the one book that I feel like I learned so much more new things about God while reading it, more than any of the others. C.S. Lewis is so good at writing so much deep metaphor that you kind of have to really focus and dig into to understand fully, but I love that about it. I love that it's a little bit more of a challenge. Such a cool story. Okay, I'm gonna stop. And then number two is The Chronicles of Narnia. I would recommend all 7 books in this series. My favorites were The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian. I also really liked The Silver Chair and The Last Battle a lot. These, just like the Wingfeather Saga books, are catered towards a younger audience. However, to me that didn't matter at all with Narnia. It wasn't like it was so young that I just wasn't getting anything out of it. It was still like very good, high quality writing, but also just combined with this really sweet family story. Every book is a new adventure with new characters, which I love. I feel like a lot of you have probably read these before, so you probably already know. So good. Everyone should read them. Now it's finally time for my last book or my last series on this list. Like I said before, some people might not think that this is a Christian series. It's not defined as that, but I know the author is a Christian, and when I read it, I saw so many Christian themes in the story that I feel like it had to be on this list, so we'll get into that. Now it is time for the last and final series in this entire list. I honestly don't even think I need to explain the plot of these books because I'm sure everyone already knows it. These are such famous books, but they're also really famous movies. They've been around for ages, and I'm sure a lot of people watching have probably already read them at this point, but I really wanted to include them in this list because the author of these books was a Christian, and I can personally see a lot of really strong Christian themes in these books, specifically when it comes to resisting sin. These books are all about that, but they're also really fun, adventurous fantasy stories at the same time. So if you happen to have not read these yet, I definitely recommend them. And you might have already guessed what these are at this point, but they're The Lord of the Rings. I read these books back before I was into super heavy fantasy, so they were a huge leap for me into the fantasy genre, but I'm so glad I did it because even though there was some slow moments for me, by the time I got to the end, I ended up just really loving them. And I ended up being really sad when they were over because I just wanted them to continue on. So those are all of my books on this list. I hope there were at least some that you found really appealing and that you are excited to go read now. I'm actually about to do a video where I read some new Christian fantasy, so I will be adding more to this list soon, and let me know if you have any Christian fantasy or sci-fi recommendations that I can read next. Thanks for watching!